If you're like me, you've read some pretty weird stuff, and you might be wondering, how difficult and weird can an early 20th century writer really have been? What is The Sound and the Fury? It's a 1929 book by the legendary William Faulkner, who is tied only maybe with Hemingway as being the most recognized and studied of the early 20th century American writers. The Sound and the Fury is about the Compson family on an interval about 30 years in the late 19th and early 20th century, so it's about 2 generations after the Civil War ended, which is an important detail to recognize throughout the book. The book follows around the Compson family as a whole, but mainly focuses on 3 of the siblings who are deeply affected by the actions of their sister, whom they all share this really kind of strange obsession for different reasons. Faulkner chose a pretty interesting format for this book, I think. It's broken up into 4 parts. The first 3 parts are first-person narratives of the 3 brothers. You got Benji's section, who is a mentally disabled 34-year-old who has no real sense of time. You got Quentin's section, who is the oldest brother, who is an extremely neurotic, manic depressive person dealing with what he had to deal with in his family life. And you got third section, which is Jason's, which I will explain in great detail later because it's a really disturbing part of the book. The last section is actually in third person, and it follows around kind of the servant family that looks after them and the closing events of the book. Now, the first thing you need to know before opening this book is that you're going to need to buckle up for the first narrative. It's about Brother Benji kind of dealing with all these things happen to him that constantly trigger these memories in his narrative, and Faulkner shows this by use of italics. So when you see a sentence in italics, that means there's a time shift in the narrative, but Brother Benji, being mentally disabled, doesn't really understand time in the way we do. So his memories are just put right there into the present tense, and you kind of have to piece all the things together that happen. This first narrative is really challenging, and it deters a lot of readers, but trust me, push through it, all the events do make sense. Usually I take notes when I'm going to review something like this, but the first 10 pages of notes I took was just from the first section of trying to piece together all the things that were happening from Benji's narrative, because it's really hard to tell what's going on. All these things are just thrown at you. You don't understand what's a memory. You don't understand what's happening right now. Not to mention, this is all through the perspective of a heavily mentally disabled person, so it's like the narration is unreliable in that sense alone. Unfortunately, the second narrative actually isn't much easier. It's told by Brother Quentin, who, like I said earlier, is a really neurotic, I would say depressed person. I mean, he definitely is a depressed person. His narrative is pretty fractured as well, with these free-flowing memories that come in and out of his narration as well. When he gets these memories triggered, Faulkner just throws traditional grammar out the window. These thoughts come at you in these really dense paragraph bursts of like short words, no periods, no commas. It actually mimics someone that suffers from mental illness pretty well. It's pretty inventive for a book that came out in 1928. Now, the third narrative, oh my god. The third narrative is told by one of, straight up, the most cruelest, insufferable, self-pitying, self-victimizing, pathetic little bitches that I've ever read in a story ever, period. Brother Jason. This section was actually the hardest for me to get through. It's a lot easier than Benji's jumbled section or Quentin's neurotic section, but he's just so insufferable. Like, it's interesting usually because I tend to like the asshole characters in a book, but God, I hated this guy. Like, it's fascinating to get a perspective like this in the first-person narrative, because usually when you're in a first-person narrative, you're rooting for the guy. I've read unreliable narrators before. I mean, there's Holden from Catcher in the Rye, obviously, and Humbert from Lolita being the obvious examples, but good God, Jason really is something else to stomach. The final section is actually kind of a strange shift because it's not told in first person, it's told in third person, and it follows around the servant family in the final events of the book, and it kind of wraps up kind of what the book's leading to, which is essentially the complete downfall and decay of the Compson family. One of the biggest themes throughout the book is that of traditional Southern values and how prominent white families in the South were faced with changing times in the dawn of modern America. Like, things really changed after the Civil War. Most importantly, slavery ended, and a lot of these families that made all this money and had all this wealth and status pretty much crumbled and fell. And that's what you're watching in this book. This is what you see happen, and you see it firsthand, really personal. Some of the Southern themes are like men should be the face and the voice of a family and should show control and authority. Women should be these sexually pure belles who show proper and reserved etiquette in all time, and they need to be these pure feminine object dolls, and they should know their place in the family. Or how black families should be completely subservient and grateful to white families for giving them a place to live in exchange of work. Many of these themes get directly challenged by the main characters of the book, by the main character of the book, Caddy, who doesn't even get her own narrative, which I thought was a really interesting play on Faulkner's part. She grows up and starts to rebel against these standards, and the family reacts to it in different ways. I mean, it really forms the basis of the book is these three brothers' obsession with her and her actions and how much it changed everything for this family, which just shows just how shaky the foundations of some of these old-time Southern values really are. Another interesting theme Faulkner plays with is that of the human experience as it interacts with time. Like I said earlier, Benji's section is completely non-sequential. It's a stream of memories and occurrences that just come in and out, and you see these things through the lens of a non-chronological order. And you see how jumbling up things can affect how you view things. This is shown symbolically throughout the book, too. Like, you hear the dad, Father Compton's ramblings about how time is the most important thing and order, and then you also see the depressed brother Quentin's obsession with this ticking watch his dad gave to him, which also symbolizes order, and he gets so upset by it. He always hears the ticking everywhere he goes. It's an interesting symbol. This was the first Faulkner book I ever read, and after reading it, I see where Cormac McCarthy got his chops from. I mean, Faulkner really gambled with this novel. I mean, it's amazing that it was published in this format back in 1928. It's so inventive and fresh, and it's so interesting. I haven't read a lot of work from that time frame, but I wouldn't imagine it would be this experimental in its nature. It was a really good book. I love this book. I'd give this 5 stars, man. I would reread that book again, which brings up another point. This book has excellent reread potential. It's only about yay thick, so you can reread it, and knowing the overarching events kind of helps you decipher some of the more complex emotions that the first 2 narratives deal with, since they're so jumbled and hard to understand. It will make more sense to you, and I think you can get more out of this book. I definitely will probably end up reading it again. Anyways, that's it. Subscribe to my channel, like if you like the video, dislike if you dislike it. I got lots of books coming down the pipe, so thanks guys.